Have you ever just felt like there are these invisible rules kind of guiding our world? Forces that shape everything from our daily routines to these huge global events. Well, you're not wrong. There are. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain and see exactly what they are. It's a massive question, right? I mean, we see elections, we hear about new laws, we follow the headlines, but what are the fundamental systems that are actually holding it all together? Let's dig in and try to find an answer. Because when it comes right down to it, it's all about us, people. How we agree to live together, how we handle our disagreements, and maybe most importantly, how we decide who gets to make the big decisions. It is so much more than what you just see on the nightly news. Now, to make sense of all this, we're going to focus on three huge concepts: politics, power, and ideology. If you can understand how these three things connect, it's like getting the blueprint for how our world really works. So, first up, politics. And nope, I'm not just talking about politicians or casting a ballot. We've got to think way, way bigger from that. The word itself actually comes to us from ancient Greek for city. So politics, at its absolute core, is the process of organizing our life together in that city. It's this constant negotiation between all these different groups with different interests, all just trying to figure out how to coexist. But what's the engine behind politics? What actually makes those negotiations happen and, stick? Well, that brings us to our second big concept: power. This is so crucial. Power isn't something one person just has. It's a social thing. It's the ability of a group to act together or for one group to make another group do what it wants. It is always fundamentally collective. The philosopher Hannah Arendt just nailed it with this quote. When we say someone is in power, what we're really saying is that a group has given them the green light to act for them. If that group falls apart, poof, so does the power. It's not something you can just own by yourself. And this leads us to a really critical distinction, because power can be split into two very different flavors. On one side, you've got legitimate power, which is all based on consent. It's given freely. And on the other side, you've got power that's based on force and coercion. One brings people together, and the other, it just creates dominance. This is the perfect illustration of that difference. Think about Gandhi. He had immense power, not because he had an army, but because millions of people agreed to follow his lead. His power was granted to him. A warlord, on the other hand, gets their power from violence and the threat of it. Their power is taken and it's held onto through fear. See? Two sides of the same coin, but totally different in how they work. All right, let's move on to our third and final concept. And this one might just be the most powerful of all, mainly because we almost never see it. We're talking about ideology. The best way to think about ideology is it's the operating system running in the background of our society. It's that whole set of shared beliefs, ideas, and values that we often just accept as common sense or, that's just the way things are. It's really just a collection of ideas that becomes so widespread, so dominant, that it feels like the absolute truth. And a huge function of ideology is to explain and, let's be honest, often to justify why society is set up the way it is. It makes the current power structure seem totally normal and even inevitable. Here is a perfect example, and I bet we've all heard this one a million times. This idea suggests that our society is a pure meritocracy, that your effort is the only thing that really matters for success. It's a really powerful and motivating idea. But does it always square with reality? A number like this kind of forces us to hit pause on that simple, just work harder story. We're talking about 8 individuals, 8, who own as much wealth as the poorest half of the entire world's population. Seriously, let that sink in. If hard work was the only factor, could a situation like this even be possible? This is what we call an ideological contradiction. It's that moment when the story we tell ourselves doesn't quite line up with the reality on the ground. The philosopher Marilena Chaui gives us a fantastic little story to help us see how ideology works to paper over these very real contradictions in our day-to-day lives. Okay, so here's the breakdown. The ideology, is that education is a universal right. Sounds great, right? But then look at the reality. The very person who physically builds the school often can't afford the tuition to send his own kids there. The contradiction isn't just between the idea and reality, it's inside reality itself. The ideology's job is to hide that real-world gap between who creates the value and who actually gets to benefit from it. So we have politics as the negotiation, power as the engine and ideology as the invisible script. But where does this whole drama play out? Well, its main stage is what we call the modern state. The way we've organized political power hasn't always been the same, not by a long shot. It evolved from these scattered feudal territories to these big centralized kingdoms run by monarchs, and finally to the system that most of us are living under today, the modern state.
And what exactly makes a state a state? Well, it rests on three main pillars: a clearly defined territory with borders, a population living inside it, and a government that holds the power to manage the whole thing. This is the basic structure where all of our modern political life happens.
Okay, I know, we've covered some pretty big abstract concepts. So what's the point? Why is understanding any of this actually important? Here's the most important thing to take away from all this. These forces, they are not just stuck in textbooks or in government buildings. Power dynamics are happening in our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities. Ideology shapes our ambitions, our values, how we see everything. They are the invisible architecture of our daily lives. By understanding politics, power, and ideology, we get the tools to look beneath the surface of the headlines and all that common sense. We can start to ask deeper questions about why things are the way they are, and maybe, just maybe, how they could be different. So the real question is, what are you going to do with that new perspective?